So we will start with our webinar today. Mr. Michael Barnard's short list of climate actions emphasizes the importance of prioritizing technically viable, economically competitive, and socially acceptable solutions for effective decarbonization. Embracing these actions can lead to increased prosperity, resilience, and overall well-being, while neglecting them may result in economic challenges in the future. And it is crucial for nations to consider these strategies for a sustainable future. In the first webinar of this series, titled Electrify Everything Everywhere All at Once, Mr. Barnard presented the reasons why electrification is the best route for decarbonizing. The recorded version of this webinar is available on ISGF's YouTube channel. In fact, the second and third webinars link will also be posted in the chat box, so you all can visit the link. It's on our YouTube channel, and review all three webinars, past webinars. In the second webinar of this series, which was titled Wind and Solar, but what else? Mr. Barnard highlighted the likely endgame mix of electrical generation on grids globally, characterizing generation types, including co-benefits. While wind and solar will dominate, they have different aspects and dependencies. In the third webinar of the series, which was titled HVDC Reconductoring and Smart Walls Supercharge Grids, Mr. Barnard discussed how to optimize our grid to meet the demands of electrification, manage energy loss over long distance transmission, and improve grid resilience against increasing heat. As we electrify everything everywhere all at once, the grid becomes a crucial element. Will we be able to supply sufficient electricity to vehicles, buses, heat pumps, and industries? What energy losses can be expected when transmitting wind and solar power over long distances? Are we maximizing the efficiency of our current grid infrastructure? How will overhead wire cope with rising temperatures? So Mr. Barnard will offer insights into these inquiries and more during this today's webinar. Before starting with our session today, we kindly request all the participants to please keep your microphones muted during the session. And to ensure smooth communication and presentation, we request refraining from unmuting or enabling your video feeds while the speaker is addressing. You can type your messages or questions in the chat box. We will be compiling and taking them in the end. So moderator for today's webinar is Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai, and the presenter for today's webinar is Mr. Michael Barnard. A quick introduction. Mr. Pillai has been the president of ISGF since its establishment in 2011 and has served as the chairman of GSEF, Global Smart Energy Federation, since 2016. With nearly 4 decades of experience in the electricity sector spanning various roles and continents, Sir is an internationally recognized expert. Mr. Pillai is leading a mission to utilize technology for the transformation of electric grids, aiming to ensure clean and reliable electricity accessible to all citizens around the clock at an affordable cost. And Mr. Barnard is a respected authority in the field of clean energy, sustainability, and electrification. With a wealth of experience and expertise, Mr. Michael Barnard has founded The Future is Electric to promote the adoption and electrification as a sustainable solution for our energy needs. His insights and knowledge make him a valuable guide in navigating the complexities and opportunities of electrification across industries. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over the stage to Mr. Reggie Kumar Pillai to take the discussion forward, and later we'll be having a very interesting presentation by Mr. Barnard. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants from around the world. My pleasure to welcome you all for this fourth edition of this webinar series. Today we'll be talking about energy storage. Decades ago, when we studied electrical engineering, we were taught that electrical energy cannot be stored. It has to be that generation and demand has to be matched perfectly in every cycle. But storage has different storage technologies we've been using for several decades, much before that. So pumped hydro storage is traditionally we used it, although its efficiency is much less, 55 to 70%. Most of the pump storage plants operating, the energy price arbitration, though they are still viable. When your surplus energy, which is available at 2 cents, and at peak hours you can sell it at 10, 15, 20 cents. So that becomes viable commercially. But the problems with pump storage hydro is that it is highly geographically dependent. Although now people started making different systems for making two reservoirs at the two elevations artificially, but it takes long time, huge capex, and you need water also. There are traditionally many other electrochemical technologies for energy storage, compressed air technologies for energy storage, several of them. In 2018, 2019, India's Smart Grid Forum was tasked with the assignment of preparing a energy storage roadmap for India by 2032. What would be our energy storage requirement for the grid based on the renewable energy program which we were pursuing at that point in time? So we did modeling studies, we did examined different regions, different states in India, and finally we prepared energy storage roadmap, which was adopted by Niti Aayog, our policy think tank, and MNRE, MOP, and Central Electricity Authority. It was issued. It's a public document. It's available on all this website, including ISGF website. So during the course of that preparation of that energy storage roadmap, we examined deeply the technological challenges, commercial viability of each of the technologies, the mechanical, electrical, electrochemical, all technologies from flywheel to everything we examine, and what is immediately viable in the near future. By 2032, this was published in 2019. By 2032 timeframe, in the next decade, what is going to be commercially viable, technically viable? So we had finally come to the conclusion that we will recommend only batteries at this point in time. The reason being that it attracted a lot of criticism from many honorable people saying that you didn't consider pump hydro, you didn't consider this, that. So on the pump hydro, there are more than 24 projects which were detailed project reports were available for last 3 decades, but no work has happened. Only one project which was completed sometime in 2005, 2006 in West Bengal. That's only last major pumped hydro storage plant commissioned, and now I'm told that in this month or next month in Kurnool another plant will be commissioned. So looking at several challenges and the immediate need for India was pursuing a program of 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2022. Now it's 24. We already have close to 140. Solar plus wind is about 135 today. So the need for storage is imminent, and these kind of technologies which has several dependencies are difficult to connect it to the grid or deploy it. So we found at that point in time in 2018-19, when we finally decided we will recommend battery energy storage for the grid support immediately, we assessed the price. That's the time when the battery prices had just come down below $200 per kilowatt hour. 2018 and 2019, it was somewhere at that number, $180, $190 per kilowatt hour. We found that will further go down. It will come somewhere near $100 by 2025. That's what we had in the best estimates we had that time. It will come closer to 100. But just after COVID, it has already gone below $100. And early this year, the world's largest battery manufacturing company, CATL, they reduced their prices by 40%. It has now come down to LFP battery prices, $56 per megawatt hour, so kilowatt hour, $56 per kilowatt hour. So when we prepared the energy storage roadmap and today's price, almost 1/4. So we stand indicated. Most of the people are agreeing to the fact that battery is the way forward, although its life is not very long as we expect. A pump storage hydro plant runs for 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. A battery may give you maximum 10 years or 12 years. But the advantage with the battery is that it can be deployed less than 1 year. Even 100 megawatt, 500 megawatt battery energy storage system can be deployed at the maximum 12 to 18 months. And many cases it has been proven that such large hundreds of megawatt scale BESS plants are constructed less than 100 years. And it can be moved from one location to another location. It can be used for different applications. So it has its versatility. But today I won't take much of time. So there are many new technologies which you will hear about it. Just before the COVID, a new set of gravity storage people were going around raising capital. So not a single successful gravity storage project has been delivered yet. Although one such company, the front runner, is claiming that they have commissioned a plant in China and they were to do it in Switzerland. And they claim that they have commissioned a plant in China very recently, sometime in November or December. And a couple of other people in UK and in America also working on the gravity storage. We yet to see the real performance of that. What is the round trip efficiency? We also see many people doing pumped thermal energy storage. I expect and hope that that technology will become viable commercially sometime, at least in the next decade. And there are many other things or in the labs. Different people are working all across the globe. We keep a close watch of what is happening where. The latest which I see is supercritical CO2 based Brighton cycle. So which is another technology which we hope that maybe in next 5 to 10 years it will be commercially viable to deploy. So while all these are there, immediate need, the rate at which the renewables are increasing on the grid everywhere on earth, in India, in Europe, in America, Australia, every part of the world, the solar and wind is increasing at a faster pace. So we have currently about 12 gigawatt of renewables connected to the distribution grid. And very recently, our Prime Minister announced a program of 10 million rooftop solar in next 3 years with a cumulative capacity of 30 gigawatt. So how and that 30 gigawatt of from 10 million rooftop will happen. It can happen in 3 or 4 years. But to manage that, we need storage in every feeder or every substation. Distribution companies are going to struggle to manage these things. So I hand over the stage to Michael. He will talk about different technologies, storage technologies for different applications. Over to you, Michael. Sorry, I took more time today.
Thank you, Reggie, and thank you, ISGF, as always. My apologies to people. As we're 21 minutes into the hour, I will be going through these slides more quickly than I anticipated. So let's break this down into chunks so we understand. Reggie is completely right that the demand point today is for stuff that battery technology works well. What we have is a case where we need frequency and voltage ancillary services, where there's response time must be in milliseconds, and we need peaker and solar time shifting within the day. Later on, we're going to need longer duration storage where the energy and power are decoupled. And we're going to need strategic reserves for the 10 to 100 year timeframes when there's no wind and there's no solar for an extended period of time. Less of a concern in India, where the solar is much more consistent, but still something that has to be planned for. And so the question becomes, how do we provide storage of different types across those technologies? One of the key things we want to try and do, and one of the advantages of the emergence of storage, is that curve in the back, that jagged line is a typical curve from India's power demand from a study that was done a few years ago. It's probably changed now. The duck curve line, that black line, indicates that as solar comes online in the midday, demand and supply change substantially. And so what we have is a nighttime drop when there's potentially a lot of wind on the grid, and that wind can be used to shift demand for charging vehicles, for buffering truck stops, for heating hot water for homes and for commercial buildings, and for charging vehicles of all kinds. It can also be used to put into grid storage. That duck curve can also be a time for shifting demand to that midday solar peak or to adding grid peak storage. And the intent is to flatten that big spike over on the right. That black line across the top indicates a high degree of distribution grid utilization. Right now in the United States and Europe, grid utilization is distribution grid utilization is 50 to 60%. In India, per the sources I have, it's lower due to some other constraints. However, that's the material I had is not necessarily up to date. Perhaps Reggie at the end of this can articulate it. The value proposition, one of the value propositions is that storage and this demand shifting can enable utilities to get a lot more out of the distribution grid assets, and thus have a lower cost per customer for the distribution grid side of things. It's a much more viable, useful thing. As Reggie said, there's a lot of energy technologies. This is a framework I tend to use to communicate where there's a lot of hype up in the sexy and foolish space. Virtual hydrogen for energy and all these things is up in the sexy and foolish space. But that practical column gets to the heart of the matter. Right now, grid lithium ion especially, but emerging chemistries like LFP are getting a lot of attention. They're easy to put in, they're increasingly cheap, but they couple energy and power. That's suitable for that shorter period, their current duration. As we move forward, that energy and power is going to become disadvantageous. We have to put in more and more batteries just to get the energy, and that power capability is different. So I'll talk a bit more about that later. But redox flow is there. We've got smart charging for demand management. We've got pumped hydro, passive hydro, where dams are not treated as base load, but as on-demand peakers. So we allow them to be more flexible and nature fills them. And then we need some strategic reserves. And my preference is capturing the methane that comes out of our existing human-caused activities like landfills and dairy barns and other things, and putting that slowly into the strategic methane reserves and just running combined cycle gas generation plants. And of course, heat storage. There's some stuff where it's sexy and foolish, like generating electricity from it, but it's pretty good for a lot of things which we're not using it for. It's a great place where if you need hot water during the day for cooking, cleaning, and you heat it at night when the electricity is cheap, with a heat pump, you've got a tremendous optimization just with that technology. So I'm much more bullish on pumped hydro than Reggie is. Statistics I've seen on well-designed and well-managed pumped hydro indicate they're 80% round trip. They're been on the grid for a long time, and they are still dominant in terms of grid storage from a power and especially an energy perspective. That's not a very old circle diagram pie chart on the side. 98% of the deployed grid storage was pumped hydro. The IEA's most recent report on battery storage indicates massive deployment of batteries, but that's almost entirely inside electric vehicles, not on grid storage. So while we're seeing a lot of attention paid and a lot of value from battery electric, it's a bit of a availability bias in terms of what we're actually seeing in terms of how it's actually coming about. When I talk to battery storage and grid storage people in the UK, for example, like Mark Wilson, he's developing both pumped hydro and batteries. And his perspective for the UK, the battery side, the cell-based battery side, they're going to be complete with the energy, the need for that component of storage in 2028 or 2029 at current velocity. In other words, while they're going to be able to fulfill that short-term need completely and do it quickly, but it's a short-term opportunity. And that's my perspective on a lot of this, is that there's going to be a point where the batteries type coupling of energy and power falls down. Now, I'm challenged on that in a couple of ways, which I'll speak to at the end, because there's a changing dynamic. But we also talk about vehicle to grid. Vehicle to grid, every time I talk about storage, people say, well, we're going to have all these batteries in the vehicles, which we do. We're going to have lots of them. My estimation is we're going to have 20 gigawatt hours of batteries in electric vehicles, electric personal vehicles in the United States alone by 2050. A lot. But there's challenges there. Now, I think that smart charging top line is going to dominate. Basically, India's already got a time of use billing that is pushing people into the solar peaks, into the solar periods, and into nighttime by sending a price signal. Exactly the right thing to do. But I will say that for India's sake, that because of behavioral economics, the way that people actually think, that kind of works and it kind of doesn't. The best way is if the price signal is sent to an automated solution which optimizes for the customer around a policy which they have to opt out of. In other words, smart chargers say, unless the customer tells me otherwise, I'm going to only charge in periods when there's high solar, there's low costs of electricity for one reason or another. That automation coupling needs to start emerging. Some of that for multi-unit residential buildings with electric vehicle charging in the parkades becomes automatic because typically the multi-unit resident is paying for the electricity and they're paying for that power peak. I'm paying quite a lot in my building of roughly 300 or 400 residents. We pay about 25% of our electricity bill is the power peak value. And so as we explore charging for the building, we are explicitly looking at smart chargers that push that out. So some of that will just occur naturally. Then there's the opportunity for aggregated large organizations that provide charging and fleets to work with utilities to tie into demand management solutions that the electricity management systems of the utilities already use and contract with them for reduced charging power in times of high demand as an opportunity. But there's also an opportunity with the lowering battery prices for fleets and truck stops and other high demand areas to build enough batteries that they can actually charge them at a consistent power level for 24 hours and provide all the services, effectively turning the battery into a flat energy demand, a very consistent energy demand, which utilities have a different value for. The cheapest rates in many jurisdictions are for industrial demand power, which is absolutely consistent. Now, that's Quebec, where there's lots of hydro. There's some interesting modeling to be done around that. And vehicle to grid and vehicle to home are just lower likelihood things. They're very hot in North America, where everybody has a detached home and everybody has a driveway and they're not in a multi-unit residential building. But that doesn't describe most of the world, and that doesn't describe most of India. And so that vehicle to grid, perhaps in commercial fleet perspectives, but I suspect not there because they need the electricity to do their jobs. So as I look at grid storage technologies, I abstracted up the attributes of storage to determine the requirements as we think across them. So how long does storage last, that energy versus power flexibility, which becomes important later in the cycle of decarbonization, the cost per megawatt, longevity, as mentioned, the cycle count, how long does it last, how many times can we whip through it before it starts to degrade, how long it takes to build, viability at multiple scales, because I'm going to say it very clearly, if you're not talking a gigawatt of power, or approaching a gigawatt of power, and 5 to 10 to 30 gigawatt hours of energy, why bother with pumped hydro? It's a big thing. Maturity, environmental risks, current deployment, how often is it, like I said, pumped hydro is over, and that geographical flexibility thing. So we've got pretty good coverage with pumped hydro, and it's why I'm bullish on it. It's got all these attributes which make it valuable, and it's not something we need right now as much, because that energy requirement is different. We need the power and we need the grid stabilization today. So I completely agree with Reggie and the ISGF's modeling about what India should be doing in the short term. I disagree in the long term. The next one is lithium-ion batteries, quite differently spiky. Now this chart is a look at the cost per megawatt hour. This chart is from a couple of years ago, and I, like everybody, am surprised by how fast battery prices have been plummeting. We're all, even battery optimists as I am, and I'm strongly a battery optimist, not saying anything against lithium-ion as a grid storage technology or lithium phosphate or other chemistries. It's just the price point reductions are being boggling. So when I redo this, as I redo my projections every 2 to 4 years as new data comes in, I'm undoubtedly going to make this a bit different. I'm going to assess that cost. Longevity is a problem. Pumped hydro, it's 100 to 125 year asset. It's not expensive to rebuild. And every 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years, you're going to have to replace the cell-based battery solutions. Great if you need the power and the instantaneity, not so great if you need the other stuff. And, it's mineable and all that stuff. And so we start seeing the construction time being very viable. The viability at multiple scales is so important. One of the reasons we keep being surprised is anything that can go into a personal electric vehicle of any type gets built by the millions and billions of cells. And that drives down the cost per cell tremendously. So lots of great stuff. Current deployment there's certainly more current deployment of grid storage, but nowhere near the level of actual power from pumped hydro. Redox flow batteries are interesting. They're another set, they're basically something like a fuel cell between a couple of tanks of chemicals that as you put in electricity in there, chemicals flow through. And it's the same thing as a small cell-based battery, but it decouples energy and power again. So as we move into the 2030s and 2040s, the value proposition of redox flow batteries increases. And they have geographical flexibility, which pumped hydro doesn't. And I'm going to say the following very carefully. If we didn't have high voltage direct current transmission, I would care more about geographical flexibility. But we're transmitting power all over the place anyway through highly efficient cables. So the fact that you don't have pumped hydro facilities available in New Delhi doesn't really seem as relevant to me. You just need to build the transmission, and India's certainly good at that. So these things for me say that for the technologies of grid storage of the future, redox flow batteries, pumped hydro, and lithium-ion batteries or cell-based batteries are going to be dominant. Now, that price point change, I've had this discussion with infrastructure funds in Europe. They've asked me, as these things get cheaper, does it really just not matter? Will we just put more and more and more batteries on? Because we can waste the power capability, but the energy is cheaper. And that's a really good question. I've adjusted this slightly. I have to come back to that and think about it. More the point here is, as we go through this, I'm not addressing in this the strategic reserves, but pumped hydros, that shift in energy requirements versus power requirements as we move through the end game of decarbonization becomes important. You notice you're seeing the majority of the increase here, but I will also say the following. The big increase here, one of the things I like to do when I look at things is ask, what's China doing at scale? Because whatever they're doing at scale and at speed is probably the right answer in the majority of situations outside of China, just because they're ahead of the curve on some of this. Like electrified buses, yeah, okay, electric buses, one of our hot fuel cell buses, because they have 600,000 electric buses and 3,000, 4,000 fuel cell buses. There's probably an indication that electric buses are fit for purpose. And in China, they already have, since I built this initial projection, added 50 gigawatts of power, possibly a terawatt hour of energy storage in the form of operational pumped hydro. And they have another 365 gigawatts of power, possibly representing 8 or 12 terawatt hours of energy. And so as we look at China, we say, they're going big, very big on pumped hydro. That is an indicator that we should be thinking about pumped hydro as a strategic thing for the long-term energy storage, because we learn from the people who are doing it right, and China's doing a lot of stuff right. So that's a counter argument to dismissal of pumped hydro, in my and then there's the other thing. India is just not a place where it's like the prairies in the United States or the northern steppes where the Ukraine is in Europe. It's not all flat. There's a lot of pumped hydro assets, resources that could be taken advantage of. And this is the Australian National University's Greenfield pumped hydro resource map for India and surrounding area. And all of those dots, you can see we're over here, 5 terawatt hours, 200 hours, 1.5 terawatt hours. There's a lot of energy storage available in these resource locations. And this is specifically for closed loop off-river pumped hydro. So not damming a river or a stream, but finding a place where you've got 400 meters or more of head height. And you can put a little dam on a gully up in the hill, and you can dig a hole down at the bottom, dig a tunnel between them, and get energy storage at 500 meters of head height with 1 square kilometer ponds at the top and bottom, holding a gigaliter of water and putting it up and down. That's a gigawatt hour of energy. The resource potential to add gigawatt hours is just making the reservoir bigger. And that's cheaper to make reservoirs bigger than almost anything else we do in this context. So as we get into the energy storage as opposed to the fast power response type of thing, my perspective is that pumped hydro is going to, as it is in China, see a significant resurgence. But that doesn't mean that I know India's conditions well enough to say that there are all these different colored dots aren't right where people have properties and villages and existing uses. And so I don't know that. What I do know is that ANU looked at close to transmission, off of protected lands, 400 meters or more of head height, and the availability of top and bottom reservoirs within a couple of kilometers of one another. So pretty good starter point. They found 100 times the resource capacity of pumped hydro as total energy storage needs for the world. And it's just water. It doesn't consume water. It doesn't have to be purified water. It goes up, it goes down, the water gets bored. Strong value proposition for that. There's also brownfields. These are places where there are existing mines or existing facilities that can be converted to pumped hydro and to provide that value proposition. In some places where there's been a lot of mining, as in Quebec, for example, I'm working on a pumped hydro project, which takes a couple of old asbestos open pit mines and is considering repurposing them for that purpose. And they've got the potential for a gigawatt of power and 26 gigawatt hours of storage, conveniently located on the grid. The numbers get very staggering with pumped hydro pretty quickly. And it's stuff that people can do quite easily. But far from a slam dunk. As Reggie points out, I look at this, and I share to get how big things get done. I was actually speaking to Oxford Global Projects, the organization that Bent Flodbjerg founded just yesterday, about pumped hydro and various things. But cell-based battery storage, while they don't have them in their 25 categories of mega projects, they have over 16,000 mega projects, over $1 billion US dollars of cost in their data set now. They've been assembling it since 1998 or so. And they don't have grid storage categorized yet. So cell-based battery storage is not present, but it's going to be up there with solar and wind power. It's very low risk to deploy. You know, famously, somebody in Australia said, "Hey, Elon Musk, can you get us some battery storage?" And Elon said, "How much?" 100 megawatts of power. And Elon said, 3 months or it's free. That's like solar. It's that easy. Pour a slab, drop some shipping containers on, wire them up. The risks are low. On the other hand, as I engage around some of that, as I'm engaging with the client around potential de-risking of a pumped hydro facility with all that energy, it involves tunneling and dams, which have higher long-tailed risk. More things can go wrong. Anytime you dig underground, there's the risk of running into an igneous intrusion of rock, which is much harder than the surrounding ground, and that jams tunnel boring machines, stops them in their tracks. Snowy River 2 has done a very poor job of de-risking their tunneling. They didn't do sufficient geological surveys. They didn't know what was down there. And as a result, their tunnel boring machine is stuck. It's a 150 meter long machine, and it's stuck 195 meters into tunneling. So there are risks associated with that, but it's a strategic resort. You know, it's a much more strategic infrastructure play than batteries. I think India really should reconsider and start saying strategically, what are our energy requirements versus our power requirements? And how do we start building our energy requirements now while fulfilling our power requirements in the short term of the batteries? Because I think that's going to be a split as we move forward. So that was as quick as I can get through those slides. So let's flip it back to Reggie for moderation.
In the beginning, one of the slides you talked about vehicle to grid in the foolish segment, which that's something which we are very in India. We hope it will work, and we are going to do very soon a demonstration project. So this is AC V2G. We are very what you call in the last stages of preparation for doing it. Maybe the 4 vehicles, 4 SUVs will be retrofitted with bidirectional chargers inside the car, as well as bidirectional chargers connected to the grid. And 4 different utilities in India, 3 in Delhi, 1 in Kerala, will be managing this for from July onwards. This will be on trial for 6 months. So we hope this is something which we can really leverage for grid flexibility, because millions of vehicles will be sitting during the day, during the evening peak hours. So we are also going to have a differential tariff for electricity. Today, residential people pay, and most of the commercial people also pay flat tariff across the month. Irrespective of what time you use electricity, your tariff is flat. But it's going to change. Government, as most of you on in the program knows, India is rolling out 250 million smart meters. When the smart metering rollout is completed, the government has already said the regulators may go for differential tariff. So in the afternoon hours, when we have higher solar generation, when there is surplus power on the grid, we should give rebate. Up to 20% rebate can be given. That's a time many of the electric vehicles can charge. And later in the evening, up to 20% surcharge can be levied over and above the existing tariff. This is something which we had done a very interesting pilot projects 2 years ago in one of the states, one of the cities in North India. We found it's quite interesting. I mean, not with V2G, but with giving price signals, offering surplus generation hours, giving rebate and peak hours, making levying a surcharge. This went quite well. So anyway, we won't divert from the subject. The V2G part, we think there is a potential that can be leveraged for grid flexibility, and we are demonstrating that very soon. Your views?
My arguments against vehicle to grid mostly come down to the a lot of it comes down to the cognitive side of it. There's as I look at what Kahneman won his Nobel Prize for, it was prospect theory. Prospect theory says that people value something, they value potential loss more than they value potential gain. And they, it's part of the reality that anything you own, you value much more highly than other people do. This falls into real estate. There's a whole bunch of psychology around this. But what that means is that for people who have electricity in their vehicles, they consider that to be theirs, and they consider it to be of higher value than most utilities will most of the time. And they will fear loss of range. They'll fear loss of utility of their vehicles. And so there's circumstances under which that can work. But in my modeling of the actual use of vehicles, frequently the majority of the vehicles which are low use vehicles, personal electric vehicles, which, by the way, are fewer in India than in North America and West, those are frequently traveling during peak demand hours, and they're frequently parking away from home.
Moderating a webinar.
And the people with those vehicles will not feel they're valuable. Now, that said, there's, for fleets, I'm looking at a lot of fleets, and the expectation for a lot of fleets is very high usage power. Now, if there is a fleet which is a commercial fleet, which is purely a daytime hours commercial fleet, that's a strong opportunity for some nighttime stuff. But I still consider vehicles to be more of a demand management opportunity for utilities than a vehicle to grid opportunity. I've proven wrong. I have been proven wrong on other things as well.
So the two things. One, the current demonstration which you are doing in India is with the SUVs, the small SUVs which has 40 kilowatt hour batteries. And as you may be knowing, as others would be knowing, in V2G, normally we do shallow charging and discharging. Shallow discharging, it never goes below 30%. So we expect that people don't have. There are enough of use cases. There are enough of pilot projects and studies which says that battery participation in V2G is not going to kill the battery earlier than its warranty life. So there are some studies which says that in fact the vehicles which are participating in V2G, the battery life has improved. In fact, the shallow charging and discharging having a massaging effect on the battery and its life extended. Another very interesting case which we are doing, and I understand US is also very keen on, although they couldn't do much because of the electricity regulators have not been forward looking. It's school bus electrification. There are thousands of school buses in each city, which
Reggie,
run for 2 hours in the morning.
Reggie, there are several questions. Perhaps we should switch to answering questions from the audience.
Sure. Parul, can you project the questions? No, they are putting in a slide and they will project it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Number one is, how can energy stored possible in bulk? Yeah,
And so
okay,
there's
Michael, you can take each one of them.
yep. So the as we start considering the power versus energy, we start considering terawatt hours of energy storage. We need to scale the energy much more than the power, and that's to the point where cell-based batteries have a tight coupling of power and energy, and so decoupling that is important. Redox flow batteries are part of that solution. Pumped hydro, in my opinion, is part of that solution as well. But typically, you're still going to only get down to a limit of perhaps 72 hours for pumped hydro, given the potential. As we look forward, my perspective is we're already storing energy in bulk in most countries. It's strategic reserves of natural gas. Natural gas is just methane. As we move forward, it makes sense to me to divert the methane that we create biologically from biological processes in our economy and divert that into the long-term natural gas storage facilities. We can, methane is much less leaky than hydrogen, and methane, anthropogenic biomethane, is a huge climate problem. And so diverting that serves both climate change actions in terms of reducing methane emissions, but also provides some of that strategic energy reserve. To answer the second real question, differentiating between greenfield and brownfield pumped hydro, greenfield pumped hydro builds the reservoirs where there are no reservoirs. Builds one up on the top of the hill or in a gully, one at the bottom of the hill, and builds a tunnel between them. A brownfield pumped hydro, there are two categories of that. The first is where there are existing open pit mines or mines that are suitable for it. You already have reservoirs with height differentiation between them, possibly not both reservoirs, but you have part of the infrastructure built. You need to do some engineering to stabilize the slopes, to make it able to deal with moving water, those types of things. But you've got part of the infrastructure and you can rebuild it. The second category are some existing dams are suitable for adding pumped hydro capability to. This one is an interesting one because you need a very big lake downstream from the dam in order for that to work. If you're just taking it from the river, that doesn't make much sense. So you need a big reservoir of water downstream that's natural, mostly for that to work. There are some variants there, but those are the two categories: existing mining sites that are tapped out and existing dams where it is viable to add pumped hydro. From a nuclear power plants, I'm going to say that that's not an energy storage solution question, and we will have more of a discussion in another thing. I'll just say that modular nuclear power plants are in the sexy and foolish category, and leave it at that. Could we look at the next question, please? Yes. No, the next question. You were on the correct slide, number 5, please.
What are the advantages of energy
questions?
storage? Yes. What are the advantages of energy storage?
It's everybody knows about it. Leave it. Let's go to the 5th question. Move to 5.
Could whoever's
Okay.
go to the next slide, please? There, thank you. Let me parse this question. So storage is required in EVs, storage is required in the grid. Storage seems to take a while, cannot be fully catered. Storage needs to be deployed strategically. How this challenge of storage deployment can be handled. To paraphrase what I understand is being asked, there's all those varieties of duration and speed of response of storage, and there's storage behind the meter, there's storage in vehicles. The question, I believe, is how can we figure out what to do? And India's already done the first cut at this. ISGF under Reggie has done a study, and they said, okay, here's the patterns. I've done the study and said, here's the patterns. The need is to do those studies and say, okay, with this emergent understanding of leading practices from different parts of the world, with the decline in battery costs, with the growth of pumped hydro in major geographies that are leading in some of these things revisit that and say, okay, here's what we thought was true. Here's what we think is true now. And then, of course, as you move forward, it's a policy and strategy question. So some of that is pure price signals, as Reggie was talking about with rebates and time of use billing and smart metering, which drives behavior to a certain point. Others of it is recognizing limits, trying to get humans who are with our messy brains to do anything in their best interest economically, because we're not rational actors. We do stuff because it feels good in the moment. And getting some of that automated so that there's an automatic demand management side that diminishes those costs. Others of it is incenting behind the meter batteries. The example that I give you is, I was looking at the spread in the West of heavy duty trucking, what they call Class 8 vehicles in North America, 29 to 49 ton road vehicles with freight on them. And in that case, as we look at that, as we look at the energy demand and the power demand in truck stops, cheap batteries make that much more viable. And you don't have, while a 5 megawatt power grid connection can take years to build, a 500 kilowatt hour grid connection is easy. If a battery buffer can give 24 hours of energy at a steady state and then deliver that power to trucks, now with the cheaper batteries, we have that battery buffering opportunity for places where there's spiky power demands. And so we can trade battery storage for that. And that's the kind of thing that gets into the next round of energy storage strategies. And organizations like the ISGF and the utilities in India need to spend time thinking through this new world we inhabit and say, okay, in this world, what are our long-term needs? When do we need them? What are our opportunities for buffering? How can we avoid distribution grid costs driving up our capacity factors in our distribution grid? And then assembling a bunch of levers, from incentives to regulations to flat out buying and building infrastructure. It's non-trivial. Question 6 is also not about energy storage, and so I'm going to defer that one. Energy storage, just simply because we have the power side of it and stuff, I would prefer to stick to the storage topic this time around. In the interest of time, we are at the hour. So I've heard lithium-ion batteries above 45 degrees Celsius has issues for electric vehicles. Is it so? Yes, there are thermal management requirements for electric vehicle batteries. That's why Tesla started putting heat pumps in their cars and SUVs quite a while ago. They were leading in that regard because they discovered that thermal management of the battery pack led to greater power efficiency and greater energy efficiency. And so the heat pump can move that around. If you have a poorly constructed lithium-ion battery pack without thermal management, it's more of a problem. In the case of, but I'll compare and contrast to diesel engines. A diesel engine has to heat up in a colder climate. A diesel engine has to be heated with a block heater for an extended period of time before the conditions are right for it to start. And you can do the same with a lithium-ion battery pack. If you're in a colder climate or a hotter climate, you can, and you're going to drive in 10 minutes, you start that thermal management, and then when you start the car and are moving the car, the battery is at the right temperature, the optimal temperature. And it's not a big power drain because it's heat pumps. So all manageable, but crappy cars and crappy lithium and battery packs frequently have crappy energy management. So be aware of that. Are there any regulations and standards to look out for when looking at BSS product or project developments? If not, what areas do you see them come up in the future? So regulations and standards, as this is an India-focused thing, I don't know the specifics, regulations, and standards within India. And so, Reggie, perhaps you could field this question.
We have standards. Bureau of Indian Standard issued some standards on battery energy storage systems. But on the regulatory side, it is still silent. Despite that, we have been issuing projects now, renewable energy projects with round the clock RTC, we call it round the clock power availability. So those projects are being built with storage, and they build overcapacity, and also they build storage. Some of them, the first generation of those going to be live or commissioned this year, are going to come with pumped hydro storage, and some of them next year, which will be coming online, will be this RTC project, big ones. These are all gigawatt scale, 1 gigawatt, 2 gigawatt, that kind of projects are going to be with battery storage. But the clear regulation on that is still missing. There is a ancillary services regulation which was issued 2 years ago, which is talking about ancillary services only at the transmission level, not at the distribution level. So these things will evolve soon. So
yeah, I will say that the opportunity around chemistries, there is a bit of a hysteria that's being promoted by people opposed to the transition about lithium-ion batteries going up in flames. There is a much lower incident of lithium-ion battery grid storage and behind-the-meter storage facilities catching fire. When they do catch fire, in many cases, fire departments are not prepared to deal with the characteristics of the fire. And so there's differences in that, and there's an emergent set of looking at that. Battery pack systems go up in flames a lot less often than diesel backup generators. Battery electric cars go up in flames a lot less often than gasoline or diesel vehicles. It's inherently safer, but the characteristics mean that there's a lot of concern about it. In the West, we're seeing fire departments putting in regulations that you can't put a battery storage system underground in a campus. For example, the University of Toronto's most recent example I'm aware of, despite having permitting electric cars to park underground. It's a completely, a clearly disparate thing. And I'm not sure if it's the same in India, but fire departments have been incredibly effective in North America in gaining all the funds for emergency responses. So they're starving the ambulance service, despite being really good at avoiding fires. So we have very, 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 very few fires, and they're blown out of all proportion by the fire department because they get budget for it. For example, in the Toronto area, which is 8 million people, a tiny place by Indian standards, but 8 million people, it's big for Canada. The fire department was promoting the doubling of battery electric fires between 2022 and 2023. The number of fires went up to 56. 56 small fires in a population of 8 million people. You look at the actual statistics, they're trivial, but be aware that as you kind of look at this, some of this hysteria will be spreading in India as well, probably. However, moving on, question 9. Can the storage scenarios be changed with the advancement of lithium-ion or vanadium redox flow battery storage technologies? Yes. So lithium-ion, the advancement there is not lithium-ion, but lithium phosphate and sodium and other chemistries. One of the advantages of battery technologies is there are a lot of ways to store electricity with metals and non-metals. There's emergence, for example, of, one firm I was working with uses the process that uses CO2 and bromine to make carbonates and reverse that process and release the electricity. It's quite efficient. It's got all sorts of advantages, but it's a redox flow battery in that case. The opportunity is still moving forward in these spaces. But I will say the following fairly clearly. Lithium-ion, the vast majority of batteries built today are lithium-ion. And so that means it has that experience curve, and everybody knows how to do that, much more so than most other chemistries. But if it's in a standard form factor of an aluminum can, any chemistry which can fit in that aluminum can takes advantage of most of the factory processes and distribution processes of lithium-ion. So, there's a real interesting stuff there. Now, vanadium itself, vanadium and zinc and iron redox flow batteries, they're interesting. They're early days. I don't think we're at the end of that. But as I was saying to the investors in the CO2-based redox flow battery solution, the time when the big demand for a redox solution is 2030 and onwards. And so we have time. Reggie and ISGF were completely right a few years ago to say focus on batteries today. The time is coming when the strategic stuff needs to be done, and you need to start looking at those longer term projects like pumped hydro very seriously. Can standalone pumped hydro be considered as a standalone power generation system? I don't know about India's regulations for distribution side power generation systems. I know that in many jurisdictions in the West, there's a preferential stuff. In Southern Alberta, for example, there's lots of natural gas and transmission interconnects are high, so they have preferential treatment for small natural gas generation facilities. Not that great. But pumped hydro, as I say, it's a scale question. I don't think you should bother with 70 megawatts or 1 megawatt or 3 megawatt pumped hydro things. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just cheaper to buy some cell-based batteries and dump them on your property.
Exactly.
If that's what you need, right? Just don't fuss. It's like people in North America who have homes and they insist on getting off the grid, right? They have their own solar and they have something else and they have batteries and they have their own inverters and they have their own control systems and they snip the wire with utilities. And I say, why do you go through all that trouble? It's just more trouble than it's worth because you have to manage your own frequency, your own voltage. Just don't do it. Simple, cheap. If you actually need behind the meter energy storage today, get the right size battery. But are there standalone power generation things within India that would promote other types of things, Reggie? I don't know.
Please repeat. I didn't understand what you asked me.
Well, as with the beneficial rates for in the distribution grid generation, distributed generation, are there preferential rates for distributed energy generation in India? Stuff that feeds into the distribution side of the grid.
No, in all the states during the period from 2013 to 2016, except the northeastern states, all other states, mainland states, issued net metering policies. But over the years, some of those gone back to gross metering, and so some changes which has happened. But solar net metering is there in everywhere, but no other major policy intervention for the behind the meter resources. So we are working on that. Maybe any resource behind the meter, it can be battery storage, heat pump, whatever it comes. It could be industrial scale air conditioning plants or water heaters. Those what can be exploited for grid flexibility. There should be some regulatory mechanism to compensate them for that. So there's a dialogue, but maybe with the scale with which the renewables are, the space with which it is scaling up, renewables are scaling up, those things will become real very soon. I just take a minute. We are out of time, but there are many questions about the battery temperature, etc. So one of the main thing is about in bus and car, the four-wheelers, basically batteries are kept in a climate controlled chamber, which is not the case in two-wheeler and three-wheeler. So two-wheeler, three-wheeler, there's a real problem. We had hundreds of two-wheelers going up in flame in 2021 and 22. So we changed some norms in testing, etc. So which has reduced in 23 and 24 to here a single incident. These are all related to two-wheelers, the 45 degrees centigrade two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers catching fire. So that is not there much because we made it very strict about the some procedures with the testing and approval of the cells. And talking about, as you said, having a small pump storage in rural area is going to be much more expensive than batteries. So you rightly address batteries is good. And now someone else is asking about sodium ion versus LFP. So at LFP prices at $50 per kilowatt hour, sodium ion is anytime soon not going to come. It's still an emerging technology, not what you call. We don't have that much experience with sodium ion as we have with LFP or NMC. So if sodium ion is higher, it doesn't give me any additional advantage than LFP. It's also ideal for up to 2 hours, 4 hours, or maximum 6 hours of storage. But I may pay more money for, or any utility may pay more money for flow battery because it gives you 6 to 10 hours or 12 hours of, or even more of storage. So when the performance is by and large same, it all going to run on commercial. So instead of paying double the money, I'll have two different batteries. First battery I will use it for first 4 hours, and another battery I will use it for another 4 hours. When I get lithium LFP batteries at $50 or less. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, I think you started out with saying that basically we're running out of time. So how much more? I'm happy to spend another few minutes answering questions, but I am respectful of the audience's time and your time.
Yeah, we can take another. There are still about 35 people, so we can still take few more minutes. Maybe we'll close
Okay.
at 50. Yeah, another 5 minutes.
Okay. So question 11, advantageous for long-term energy storage. Battery electric systems provide that short-term grid stabilization. There's need for both. So the way that a pumped hydro system works is you let water, you open a gate and you're letting water down along penstock, and it's going through a turbine. And the turbine can be synchronous, which means it has to spin up to gate grid frequency, 50 or 60 hertz, or it's asynchronous, which means it starts generating electricity immediately. But that's a mechanical process. Even with the asynchronous generation, it takes a few seconds or a minute before you're actually generating enough electricity to be meaningful. Whereas battery electric systems can respond in milliseconds. So where you need that millisecond or very fast response, batteries work. Where you need lots of energy, pumped hydro works. You're going to need both kinds of characteristics because the different parts of the grid storage requirement have different characteristics. So you need both. You're not going to be able to get rid of batteries because you have pumped hydro, and you're not going to get rid of pumped hydro because you have batteries. They're different beasts. Hope that answers that. Sodium ion versus LFP and battery storage. Okay, so LFP is emerging. Reggie mentioned CATL's $56 per kilowatt hour batteries. That's at the cell level, not the pack for EVs or for grid storage facilities. But that's lithium phosphate technology. And so that's the LFP chemistry is already at that price point. It has lower energy density. It's about 80% the energy density of current lithium ion. So there's a trade-off. You get less energy in for the same weight in a vehicle, but it's great for grid storage. And so you start to see these chemistries. One of the questions you ask yourself is, oh, that chemistry against the span of instant response, slower response, more energy, more weight, which of the use cases where we need energy provision, stored energy provision, is that suitable for? For example, the maritime industry, which in my projections is going to electrify vastly more than most people think, all inland, most short sea shipping, and hybrids for transoceanic, they're much less weight sensitive. And so the lower energy density of LFP at a very low price point is advantageous, but it won't work for aviation. So aviation, where I'm starting to see is, we're starting to see the condensed matter batteries from CATL, which have double the energy density of lithium ion. And we're starting, and I'm tracking 4 or 5 organizations now, which are commercializing silicon anode energy density batteries, which either cut the weight of a battery for the same storage, or they have the potential to be 5 times the energy density of CATL's condensed matter battery. And so we'll see where there's a very strong weight advantage, aviation and potentially personal vehicles, and maybe trucks. Where we see a strong price advantage, but heavier weights, we see maritime and stationary storage. So as you look at these things, don't ask yourself which one is going to win. You're going to ask yourself, which one is suitable for which application and why? If there's, like, some of these chemistries are inherently more thermally stable than lithium ion. And so where there's a very high sensitivity to fires, maybe they'll have an advantage there that'll make them economically competitive. It's not remotely a simple answer. And a lot of it is just going to be, oh, you know, a bunch of people will buy that because it meets their needs. But we can start to project what that is. Very interesting space. How much percentage of battery wastage can be allowed to Mother Earth via circular economy? I believe this is a question about, if I can articulate and paraphrase it, recycling of batteries. So a big study was done in 2022 or 2023 to debunk the nonsense about, and the nonsense meaning only 5% of batteries. We're already at 59% global recycling of batteries, higher in some geographies, lower in others. There's no reason why we can't get to 95%, especially for EV batteries. EV batteries are big. The battery in my watch, the battery in my phone are tiny, and they're among a bunch of other stuff. But an EV's battery pack is a big chunk of mineable metals and components. Better if we build them to be disassembled, but that's a process. They last a long time. They last 20 years. We'll reuse them, then we'll recycle them. We'll get to 95%. We'll make the chemistries more. Michael Liebrecht calls this one of the 5 superpowers of the decarbonization. If we're at 95% recycling and we're increasing efficiency of our chemistries, effectively for a long time, despite the fact that we can't get to 100%, we're getting more out of the same minerals we've mined 20 and 40 years ago. And so there's a strong movement in the world. We're already at 59% as of 2019. It's higher now, and that'll be higher in the future. So don't be concerned about that. We need millions of tons of battery minerals, and we've got 20 billion tons of fossil fuels. Exchange battery station for EVs in cities. I'll quickly lean into this one. This is a place that's much hyped, and it is got niches. I'm strongly on battery swapping for trains and ship solutions. I'm strong on battery swapping for geographically constrained fleets where the cost of a 5-minute break is very high. But right now, I think that we're over-focusing on battery swapping. I think NIO is making its wrong choice with its battery swapping vehicles. GoGoRo, I think is the name of this scooter system in Asia. Well, it's losing $70 million a year, and its stock price is down to 5% of what it was at peak. I think that there are strong places where containerized batteries make sense. But right now, the price of batteries means we can put a big battery on a truck stop or a charging stop to suck power consistently for 24 hours and deliver very high speed charging the power side when cars and trucks need it at very rapid speeding. I think my projection right now is the economics work out better for that, for buffering batteries and high speed chargers, than for the mechanical constraints of trying to swap batteries across a lot of vehicles. One of the constraints on battery swapping is you need exactly the same vehicle. It has to have exactly the same containers. And if you consider public charging, if you consider just trucks, for example, well, that means all the truck companies have to agree on the dimensions and all the standards around the swappable battery, as opposed to just agreeing on what the plug looks like. You know, it's simpler to move electricity than it is to move batteries. In my opinion, I think it'll win out. But as people pointed out to me when I published on this recently, almost half of the trucks sold in China last year were sold as battery swapping capable. Now, these were fleet trucks. They're also charging capable. So it's unclear what percentage are actually using the swapping, or as opposed to just buying the flexibility to swap in the future. Because a battery swapping station, it needs to be automated, cradle to grave, has to have no people in it, has to be very precise, and it costs about $1.1 million US per battery swapping station these days, and it's not going to get much cheaper. So I don't think swapping is a big path in the future with cheap batteries, but I've been proven wrong on other stuff. This one, there's some counter examples. Once again, China is making me question my assumptions.
Michael, in India, for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, swapping stations are working very well. Although we don't have a standard, so there are 5 or 6 different sizes and shapes are form factor being followed, but it is growing very fast. Every corner you can, in big cities, at least about 30-40 cities, you can find battery swapping stations for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. This primarily came because we, ISGF, advocated that two-wheeler and three-wheeler, electric two-wheeler and three-wheeler should be sold without batteries, which has been accepted by the government. Today, there are two-wheelers and three-wheelers, you can buy it for something like $600, $700 without battery. And battery, people take it from the swapping station. So that is going. But as you said, automated, what you call robotic arm-based battery swapping stations. We tried one in Ahmedabad with Ashok Leyland and Sun Mobility some 4 years ago. It didn't. The buses had 37.5 kilowatt-hour batteries, which a robotic arm was pulling out and putting it back, which didn't go quite well. So we are not moving in that direction at this point.
Yeah, basically what I say is if a human can pick up the battery and move it between the station and the scooter, that works. If the batteries are in shipping containers that have an entire distribution system around them, that works. But creating something in the middle is expensive and tough and leads into all sorts of weird problems. Dense urban areas where there's, the government has put its foot down and said swapping, a brilliant solution, not replicated in most places. So it's interesting to see how it varies across geography. Thank you, Reggie, for pointing out that ISGF's involvement in the structural approach that India has taken to that. That's a good additional example for me.
There are 2 more questions. One talking about distributed. Yeah, this is something which we love to. Distributed, every home having rooftop solar and a battery, and they actively participating in the power market. So save or store the solar power in the battery and sell it during peak time, or sell it not to the grid but to the peer-to-peer selling of this. So we already have a regulation of peer-to-peer selling of rooftop solar energy, and a couple of more states are going to have it, and we are working towards a scenario half of India peer-to-peer trading of rooftop solar energy or clean energy will be legally valid. There will be regulations supporting that, and then people are going to do. Just imagine millions of people going to sell to millions of people, and even the car. Today, there's one of the major narrative about the electric vehicle is that Indian grid is still 80% coal power. So my electric car is not going to be a clean transportation. I am taking the gray electrons or a black electrons and putting in my car. So it's not actually green mobility, but that is all going to change. You can all actually buy from people who have a rooftop and selling it, and that's a future we are looking at it. It will happen very soon.
Yeah, I'm not bullish on that, on peer-to-peer electricity sales. You still need the utility because you still need the wires. It becomes a contract between multiple players. I looked at this in 5 years ago when I was looking at blockchain and some of these peer-to-peer energy solutions, and the contractual structures need to be established, and the utility needs to be paid for the wires. It becomes more complex than people imagine. I suspect there won't be as much participation. But I could be wrong. I just don't see it. Most people are going to care about that. Now, the advisable to have an EV charging station with battery storage delivery, yes, absolutely. The most recent assessment I did says that in 2 jurisdictions I happened to pick up a battery And with projections of the battery storage prices by 2030, based upon the $56 this year, a $30 battery storage that is sufficient to charge 22 heavy trucks a day, so it's starting trucks deployment, would pay for itself in 17 months just on the cost of electricity arbitrage. Just taking the third of the day with the lowest rates and moving that electricity to the highest rates, the owner of the truck stop would pay for the battery very rapidly, and then they'd be making coin after that. That flattening, somebody else pointed out in that discussion, one of the first charts I did had that black line of demand where the grid, that flattening and use of the distribution grid is going to emerge very rapidly. And then it's going to change the dynamics of pricing during the day. Time of use pricing in India is followed California and followed Australia. That duck curve in the middle of the day is now a different price zone at a much lower rate because the Indian government wants to shift demand to there and once again bring demand up there to combat the duck curve. And battery storage is part of that, right? It's like, well, we'll just buy the electricity for the battery and then use it in the high expensive stuff. So battery storage in truck stops, bang on. It's going to be a very big thing. And organizations which have been modeling this out have been modeling out the power demands for trucking, but not modeling out battery buffering for trucking. RMI is working on this. I've been in touch with the guy after I published on battery buffering and the opportunities there. I pointed to their RMI's paper on this. And they said, yeah, we're working on the next generation of this because things have changed. Everybody's surprised by batteries. So
last question is about taxation. We are not concerned with, neither we are aware of this tax thing. So we'll duck that question. So thank you very much, Michael. It's almost half an hour extra time. And thanks for the participants. Next one will be 2 weeks down the line. So we'll keep you posted. Take care. Good day.
Sir, sorry to interrupt, but we still have 28 participants. Can we have a group picture together?
Yeah, please, everybody, please switch on your cameras and have a group picture. Next time, we should do it in the beginning when we have maximum people. Everybody, please turn on your cameras and let's have a group picture. All ISGF people, switch on your cameras. There are only 5 people, so what will you do? Ravi sir, where are you?
I'm here. I'm just waiting for others to get their pictures taken. I get my pictures taken all the time.
So would you have any comments on today's session?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very complex subject that you gave Michael an hour to talk about. If I was to summarize, there would be 3 cut points, right? About 150 megawatt hours or 200 megawatt hours and higher. So he spoke of terawatt hours for the pumped storage. So that would be transmission connected, so that you can evacuate power and, renewable energy from anywhere to anywhere. If you come below between the 100 to 5, you generally would get into the battery energy storage at a distributed account if you want. And then behind the meter would be, 5 megawatts and lower, which would be a different. So, but the regulation is what kills it, because based on what you can purchase for and what you can sell to the grid is where the issue lies, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And that is why the vehicle to grid, and Rish and I have always disagreed on this, and you are aware, vehicle to home is probably more doable because I value both the home as well as the vehicle. But when I sell it to grid, I become like a seller. And I've quoted always, even in my younger days when we used to go and get kerosene from the shop for rationing, we never sold it to our neighbor. We never sold it to our neighbor. So it was valued far more because we got that fuel, through the government system. The second thing is every time you put a charger that's bidirectional, you are trying to arbitrage a $4 to $5 transaction on a $2,000 installation. And so you got to think this through. That's why I advocate the school bus fleets that's generally stationary between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. is probably may give you a better business case than trying to put it on individual vehicles that are freewheeling vehicles if you so wish. So I think it's a very difficult subject. So next time you probably need to give them like 2.5 hours or 3 hours. No, it is, right? And so I don't think we were fair to just pack it in 45 minutes and then give him a whole slew of questions.
Thank you very much. Good day, good night to everybody, and we'll send the recorded YouTube link within next 48 hours, and the next will be next Thursday. Thank you.
See you in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, yes.
Thank you.